Now we got to get you back to politics because today a number of 2020 hopefuls are fanned out across the nation. Beto O'Rourke making his first stop in South Carolina, Bernie Sanders kicking off his Midwest bus tour, and a handful of others stumping in Iowa. The latest poll from that early voting state shows South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg now in third behind Joe Biden, who hasn't even entered the race, and Bernie Sanders. This surge in polling comes as the mayor continues his back and forth with Vice President Mike Pence, responding to comments from Pence, who said of Buttigieg's criticism, quote, "He knows better. He knows me." In an interview with Ellen to air later this morning, Buttigieg said this.
I'm not critical of his faith. I'm critical of bad policies. I don't have a problem with religion. I'm religious, too. I have a problem with religion being used as a justification to harm people, and especially in the LGBTQ community. I'm not interested in feuding with the vice president, but if he wanted to clear this up, he could come out today and say he's changed his mind, that it shouldn't be legal to discriminate against anybody in this country for who they are. That's all.
That sounds like a challenge. Joining me now, fellow Hoosier, former governor and senator of Indiana, Evan Bayh. He's also the co-chair of No Labels. And back with me, Florida Congressman David Jolly and Amna Nawaz. Senator, I cannot think of anyone better to weigh in on this. You know both of these men personally and politically. What do you make of this back and forth?
Stephanie, I think it's fundamentally a difference of opinion about the role of religion in policymaking in our society. They're both peoples of faith. They just draw different lessons from their faith. The vice president believes that his religious convictions should drive his public policy positions. Pete Buttigieg, on the other hand, embraces the approach that John Kennedy took before the Baptist convention when he said the fact that I'm a devout Catholic does not mean I'm going to be taking directions from the Pope or the Catholic Church, that I will separate my religion. I can be both devoutly religious, but separate that from my positions on public policy. So I think that's where the fundamental difference lies.
What do you make about Mayor Pete's rise? I mean, at this point, he's in third in the polls 4 to 6 weeks ago. Not that many people even know his name, and those who did weren't great at pronouncing it.
A little bit like my last name. Look, I think it's driven by a couple of things. First, he's obviously very authentic, genuine, comfortable with who he is, and people are looking for that sort of authenticity these days when there are a lot of phonies in politics. Secondly, he's from South Bend, Indiana. He's not a part of the establishment or the swamp, all that sort of thing. So he's, can be a change agent. And third, and maybe most important for, moderates in the middle of the spectrum, mayors are practical people. You got to make sure the roads are paved, the potholes are filled, those sorts of things, the streets are safe. Actually doing things that help people in their daily lives, which is a refreshing change from the constant backbiting and partisanship that prevails in Washington. So I think for all those reasons, he's having his moment in the sun and is going to get a real hearing from the Democratic nominating electorate.
David, Buttigieg does not seem to be distancing himself from faith at all. In fact, it's as though he is trying to appeal to religious voters and maybe change the conversation around what family values looks like in 2019 and faith. We know that evangelicals were crucial to President Trump's win. They may actually be his core, unflappable base. Do you think Buttigieg could make a dent?
He could. And whether Democrats choose to nominate him or not, Stephanie, this is such a remarkable moment in American history. Nobody has had this conversation with the Christian church, with the evangelical base. Look, I was a Republican that supported marriage equality, and my approach was to say to the church, this is an empowering moment for you as a church to embrace the teachings of your faith, which in that case were traditional marriage. Pete Buttigieg is saying, you know what? I can be Christian and gay. And I want to have that conversation. Mike Pence does not get to define for the body politic what it means to be Christian in politics. I'm Mayor Pete. I'm married to another man, and I get to be a Christian too, and I get to speak about my faith. And what he's doing, he is approaching the topics of intersectionalism and identity politics in a way that no other Democrat has been able to do yet, which is he's inviting these traditional Republican performing communities to the conversation. When he said a couple weeks ago, I disagree with Chick-fil-A's policies, but I love their chicken. That was a brilliant move, because what he was saying is, listen, folks, because they're tasty, but he was saying, I understand. I understand this is a tougher issue. But he was also wearing, if you will, his identity politics, his approach to intersectionalism on his sleeve and being honest about who he was. Stephanie, whether Democrats nominate him or not, this is a magical moment in American history to have somebody say, "Your quarrel is with my creator." That is a line that will resonate for all of history.
Wow. Amna, he seems to be making this more of a policy debate than a moral debate. Will he be successful in doing so?
I mean, that's going to be up to the voters to decide, right? What's been interesting as a journalist to cover, though, is exactly what David was saying. That conversation is new and different. And is reclaiming a space that has traditionally been given and held strongly really just by conservative Republican leadership and candidates. And it's been interesting to see him meet Vice President Pence where he is, rather than try to argue on moral grounds or equality grounds, to argue about the policy. Also, let's not forget, today is the day that the president's ban on transgender Americans serving in the military goes into effect. And a lot of the arguments pushing back against that are not about morality and equality, but about the policy. At a time when you have recruiting numbers low for the military membership, at a time when they haven't been able to make the cost arguments and readiness arguments to support the ban, there are people saying, forget about whether it's good or bad, what is good policy here? And that's where we see Mayor Buttigieg kind of putting down his feet, making his arguments right now.
Senator, I want to talk about this new poll that was conducted by the Hidden Tribes Project. To boil it down, they're saying what Democrats look like on social media, on Twitter, is far different than the Democratic electorate across the country. And in fact, when you actually dig into Democrat voters, they are much closer to the middle than certainly what it looks like in the media, specifically social media. Do you buy that?
Stephanie, I do. I think this is just a further reflection of the echo chamber in which too many of us often find ourselves. I mean, if you get your information solely from the New York Times or the Washington Post, or solely from things like Twitter, or you live your life mostly in just a major urban area, you're just not going to really understand what's going on out in most of the rest of the country, including places like South Bend, Indiana, and the rest of my state. And that's why the Trump phenomena caught so many people by surprise last time. If you drive 20 minutes outside of most, any major urban area, it's just a different country out there. And it's important to understand, you don't have to agree with, their policy prescriptions, but to understand a little bit, like Mayor Pete has been saying, what their anxieties are, their concerns are, their aspirations are, so that we can have a conversation about where together we lead this country. So I'm not a bit surprised that the social media doesn't always reflect the broader Democratic electorate, because it doesn't in many ways reflect the mass of America that gets their information from other sources.
David, what do you think of this? I mean, you've got centrist candidates like John Delaney, John Hickenlooper, who would say, I'm not being dissuaded, I'm not getting pushed to the left because I'm out there talking to voters. But social media does have a big presence, and it does influence traditional media and how we see things, because we are not on the road.
It's an incredible platform that you can have the President of the United States and somebody sitting in their kitchen in Iowa with 2 followers on the same platform communicating to each other. That's an awesome thing. But to your point, if you look at some of the largest Twitter followers, those who are most active, it doesn't always translate to communities across the country. My father-in-law, we were actually discussing AOC recently, and he's a traditional Kennedy Democrat in central Pennsylvania, Catholic background, who embraces
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Right,
yes.
Right. And enamored by her like most Democrats are, because she's a rising star, but also recognizing her politics are unique to a very specific district. And there aren't a lot of districts like that across the country, including in central Pennsylvania. There are voters in those flyover states, if you will, traditionally progressive voters, who will perform in ways that may not be as far out there as you see on social media. But they're still going to be there on election day, and candidates have to reach them some way other than Twitter.
You've covered Eastern Kentucky. People there are not making the same gripes that we hear on Twitter. What are they actually saying they care about? And are candidates getting to those voters? Because candidates, no different from people in the media, watch Twitter every day and respond to the attacks on them. It's hard not to.
I think some of the lessons we're learning from these studies we're seeing now are that the loudest voices in the room are not always the most representative of that electorate. That's certainly true on social media. The challenge for us as journalists, and what I've seen on the ground, and I've been all over the country, I've been reporting along the border in different parts of the electorate. I went to the county that had the highest % of support for candidate Trump back in 2016. There's a lot of overlap with the issues. And I think the challenge for us as journalists as we go forward and cover this lead up to 2020 is to remember to get on the ground, to go talk to people about what really matters to them, and to remember that sometimes those different communities that are the conversations happening online are not representative of what's happening out in the country. That's on us to do better, and I think we're going to be up to the challenge this time.
Senator Bernie Sanders is starting his Midwest tour today. He's going to Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania in the next few days. Now, Bernie Sanders won 3 of these states during the primary, but we know the Midwest was pure gold for President Trump. Many people in this region have said, the system isn't working for me, I'm going Trump. Well, fast forward 2 years later, the system is still not working for those voters. We know that income inequality is worse than ever. Could we see those voters now go Sanders instead of Trump?
It's possible. Bernie won my state very narrowly over Hillary Clinton 3 years ago. And in an interesting way, he and Donald Trump were tapping into some of the very same anxieties and frustrations against the elites, the establishment, the belief that the system is rigged and that the decision makers don't care about the concerns of ordinary Americans, all that sort of stuff. Now, their policy prescriptions will be entirely different. But I think that that's one of the reasons the president plays identity politics and other cards to try and change the conversation. That's why the immigration issue is out there and so many of the other things that he plays that he's going to try and use to divide America and differentiate himself from people like Bernie Sanders and all the other Democrats who are running and get away from things like affordable health care, college affordability, those sorts of things. Where Bernie may be a little stronger, the president's going to try and go with identity politics.
But will the president be successful in doing that this time? Remember, when he ran last time, it was all about drain the swamp, railing against the likes of Goldman Sachs, big bankers, and carried interest. Fast forward, he gave a record-breaking corporate tax cut, a tax cut so big, many corporate leaders didn't even ask for it this week, including Jamie Dimon. He surrounded himself with former Goldman Sachs partners. So can he again go with the identity politics, down with the elites, when you got to look at the numbers? He has truly hooked the elites up.
Yeah. I think he's going to have a harder time this time. I mean, what's the old saying? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So if the election's going to be decided in places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania that David was talking about, Michigan, maybe you throw in North Carolina and Florida, but primarily those 3 upper Midwestern states, if the economy stays strong, the president is going to remain competitive. But I suspect he's going to have a hard time making this sale the second time around for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, and the fact that for most of those folks out there, the underlying anxieties, healthcare affordability, college affordability, the opioid crisis, all those sorts of things haven't gotten better, and it's going to be harder for him to divert them with things like immigration.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.